Chris was still a very young traveler 40 years ago. He just so happened to fly to Alaska, where he was drawn by the state's enigmatic landscape. Chris's primary goal, though, was the gold that he unearthed there with a small group of aficionados. Most of the time, they tended to keep together in small groups. The man went out into the bush alone, even though it was dangerous, while his companions stayed in the lodge. Many of them had caught a cold and simply wanted to rest. Chris knew that it was dangerous, but still decided to go for a short outing. He didn't know at the time that instead of Jules, he'd come face to face with a predator. Chris was making his way through the snow. He was already 2 kilometers from the camp and moving slowly towards the riverbed, when suddenly a large dog caught his attention. He was very surprised. What could a lonely dog be doing in the wild? Chris assumed that its owners might be somewhere near. The animal behaved aggressively. Being young and inexperienced, the guy decided to go down the hill and see what was happening there, but had a distance of about 20 meters. After getting a closer look at the animal, Chris froze. What looked like a big grey dog at first turned out to be a real huge wild wolf. Having noticed the man, the animal bared its fangs and growled menacingly. Since the gold digger had no chance of escaping, he simply closed his eyes, but the animal didn't move. He opened his eyes and saw that a trap had been set by poachers to capture the wild animal. Not just a male wolf, but a mother wolf as well, was tending to her cubs. The man was aware that the animal obviously needed help, but the she-wolf forbade him from going any closer, and he himself wasn't really excited about the idea. Chris's mouth was dry. He was sweating. What would you do if you were in his shoes, stranded in the wilderness? No one could save him if other wolves were close by. Leave the helpless animal to perish? Perhaps someone else would carry out that. Chris, came to the realization that the wolf den might be nearby and that the pups might still be alive. He only needed to find them and bring them back to their mother. The paw prints went quite far. The guy was fighting himself in his head. What am I doing? Fear was taking over him as he moved farther and farther away from the camp, following the footsteps. The guy had to walk for several kilometers in the snow before he managed to find the den with the pups. When Chris got closer, the little pups got frightened as any other babies would and hid in the den at the sight of the big and scary person. There was no time for hesitation. He took out a bag he had on him and put the pups in it. The trip back took him about an hour, and all this time the pups whined and floundered in the bag and even tried to growl. Even before the man got to the mother wolf, he heard a large moan. Most likely the mother sensed the smell of the pups. The guy untied the bag with the little ones, and the 4 pups rushed to their mother, whining loudly. They immediately buried themselves in her stomach and began munching loudly. The mother wolf licked her children and watched cautiously what the traveler was doing. The guy tried to help the wolf out of the trap a few times, but she immediately began to growl every time she saw the man trying to get closer. Our hero had some leftover meat, so he gave the wolf a few pieces, but to his astonishment she turned them down, perhaps thinking there was a catch. Chris stayed there till late at night watching the family. He went back to his camp once it was dark, but he kept what had transpired to himself. Chris made the decision to take more food the next day as everyone left for work. The gold prospector observed that the meat had been consumed and that the mother was warming her cubs. This continued for a few days. Every morning the young man would go to the animal and feed her, but she still continued to growl at him every day. The pups, however, began to trust the man on the 3rd day already and happily jumped around him and licked his hands. When the man would pet the pups, the mother watched them intently, and as soon as his hands would touch the little ones, she'd immediately call them over. She didn't trust the stranger. At one point the guy looked up and noticed that the mother wolf slightly wagged her tail. It was a victory. Chris got near the animal very slowly, barely breathing. The mother was finally freed when he opened the trap. She shouted for her puppies to follow her as she sprinted off for a few meters. The big family took cover in the dense jungle. Chris didn't run into them again. The man went back to his Jersey home a week later. He had already forgotten about this incident and had only occasionally told his closest friends to no avail. Since these incidents, 5 years have passed. As soon as our hero began working for a finishing business, he was back in Alaska, not Faye, far from the original location. One day the man had to deliver a letter to the neighboring village. He left early in the morning on his snowmobile, but it broke down halfway there. He tried everything he could to start it again, but it just wouldn't work. It was very cold. The village was only a few kilometers away, but it was getting dark. 1 kilometer later, he saw a dark silhouette on his way. All the locals knew that being alone far from the village, especially after dark, was suicide. There was danger everywhere, and no way to escape from a pack of wolves. Chris panicked when he realized and felt that he was being closely watched by a pack of predators. He saw how they skillfully surrounded him, forcing their prey into a circle, slowly closing in on him. He counted 5 large wolves in his head. Chris was already saying goodbye to his life. His heavy breathing and heartbeat were so strong that he couldn't even stand up and fell to his knees. He could see one of the hunters coming toward him. It stopped a few meters away, but took its time approaching the man. Chris peered into the wolf's eyes and knew them, as scared as he was. The mother wolf was the same. It was undoubtedly her, despite the fact that she was much older and had dulled fur. The animal stiffened up as it kept a watchful eye on the man for only a brief period of time. The rest of the pack followed once she returned to the forest and waved her tail a few times. This time the animal was saved, but it vanished forever into the snow, and the traveler made it to the settlement without incident. A wolf and her cubs were saved by a man one day, and the wolf returned the favor many years later.